My ex-girlfriend left me for a better life, then came back when she saw what I became. I'm writing this now at 28 years old, sitting alone in my apartment at 2:17 a.m. Because sleep doesn't come easily anymore, and because there's a version of me from a few years ago who didn't think he'd survive what I'm about to talk about. And maybe if I put it all down here, someone reading this won't feel as stupid or replaceable as I did back then. Because this story didn't start with her leaving me. It started years earlier when we were broke college kids eating dollar tacos on a cracked dorm floor, laughing about how one day we'd look back at all this and smile. And I believe that with my whole chest, I met her when I was 21. She was 20. And we were both exhausted in the same way, tired of pretending we had everything figured out. She had this laugh that made people turn around, and when she looked at me, it felt like I mattered, like I wasn't invisible. And for years, she was my person. We graduated together, moved into a small apartment that smelled like old carpet and cheap detergent, struggled through our first real jobs that barely paid rent, argued about money, and apologized in whispers because neither of us wanted to admit how scared we were. And I thought, that's what building a life looked like. Choosing each other even when things were uncomfortable, especially when they were uncomfortable. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Not all at once, not dramatically, just little things at first that I brushed off because I trusted her. She started spending more time on her phone, scrolling longer, smiling at things she wouldn't explain. She joined a new gym, then a new friend group, people I didn't really click with but tried to be polite around, people who talked about rooftop bars and weekend trips and networking, and suddenly our nights and watching shows felt childish to her. She didn't say that outright, but I could feel it in the way she sighed when I suggested it, in the way she'd check the time, in the way her eyes drifted past me. She started posting more on social media, better photos, better angles, captions about growth and knowing your worth. And I supported her because that's what you do when you love someone, right? You cheer them on even when you don't fully understand where they're going. But then the comments change, new names, unfamiliar emojis, and she'd laugh them off when I asked, saying I was overthinking, that I was being insecure, and I hated that word because it made me feel small. Like the problem was me for noticing the distance growing between us. Then came the phrases that still echo in my head if I let them. I just feel stuck, she'd say, staring at the ceiling instead of at me. I need to think about my future. Like our future wasn't the same thing anymore. Like I was an obstacle instead of a partner, and I tried harder. God, I tried harder. I picked up extra shifts, started learning new skills at night, talked about plans, timelines, goals, but nothing I did felt like enough because she wasn't asking for effort. She was asking for a different life, one that didn't include the version of me who was still figuring things out. And the night she left wasn't dramatic, no screaming, no thrown objects, just quiet devastation. She sat across from me at our small kitchen table, hands folded like she'd rehearsed it, and told me she cared about me but needed more, needed stability, needed to be with someone who was already there. And when I asked what that meant, she didn't give details. She didn't need to because a few weeks later I saw it for myself. She had already moved on, already upgraded. The guy she left me for was older, established, the kind of man who wore confidence like a tailored suit, who posted photos in places I'd never been, whose life looked complete in ways mine didn't yet. And I became a footnote in her story, a phase she outgrew. And the worst part wasn't that she left. It was how quickly she replaced me, how easily she erased the years we'd built together. One public post at a time, smiling in new restaurants, wearing dresses I'd never seen before, captions about finally feeling aligned. While I sat on the edge of the bed we used to share, staring at the empty space where she slept, wondering what was wrong with me, I questioned everything. My ambition, my intelligence, my masculinity, whether being patient and loyal had been a mistake, whether loving someone through struggle made me weak instead of noble, and people told me I'd be okay, that time heals, but at that moment, time felt like an enemy. Every day, just another reminder that I had been left behind. I felt replaceable in the most brutal way. Like anyone with more money, more status, more certainty could step into my place and do it better. And when mutual friends stopped inviting me out because it was awkward, when her name disappeared from my phone except in old photos I couldn't bring myself to delete, when I realized she wasn't looking back at all while I was still stuck replaying every conversation, every missed sign, every moment I should have seen coming, that's when it really hit me. I wasn't just heartbroken. I was embarrassed that I had believed love was enough, embarrassed that I had stayed when she was already mentally gone, embarrassed that I had to rebuild myself from a place of feeling utterly forgotten. And that's where this story truly begins. Not with success, not with revenge, but with a man sitting alone in the wreckage of a life he thought was permanent, trying to understand how someone can promise you forever and then decide you're no longer worth waiting for. And if you're still reading this, just know this was the lowest point. The moment where I felt smallest, unseen, and utterly disposable. Because what came after only mattered because of how deeply this broke me first. I'm going to be honest. The months after she left weren't some inspirational grind montage where I woke up at 5 a.m., ran 10 miles, and magically became a new man. They were ugly and quiet and heavy, the kind of loneliness that sits in your chest even when the room is full. I'd come home from work and just sit in my car for a few minutes because going inside meant facing the silence she left behind. Nights blurred together because sleep stopped feeling natural. My brain replayed everything on a loop: what I said, what I didn't say, the look on her face when she decided she was done. And some nights I'd scroll my phone until sunrise just to feel less alone, not even stalking her, just distracting myself with noise so I wouldn't think. But the thoughts always came back, telling me I wasn't enough, that I'd been too slow, too comfortable, too average. And for a while, I believed that voice. I let it narrate my life. I stopped reaching out to friends because I didn't want to be the sad guy who got left. I showed up to work exhausted, did the bare minimum. Then one random Tuesday, nothing dramatic happened, but something inside me just got tired of hearing my own excuses. Not inspired, not motivated, just tired. Tired of hating myself for someone else's decision. Tired of waiting for closure that was never coming. And that's when the shift started, quietly. Without announcements, I stopped chasing validation because I realized no amount of external reassurance was going to fix what felt broken. I deleted apps that kept me comparing my life to everyone else's highlight reels, stopped doom scrolling, stopped checking who was doing better than me. I didn't find myself. I disciplined myself. I picked one thing at work I could get better at and focused on that. Then another, stayed late not to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel competent again, useful again. I started learning skills after work instead of numbing myself with distractions. Small progress at first, almost unnoticeable, but it added up. My boss noticed before I did. Then came a raise, not life-changing, just enough to remind me I wasn't stuck forever. I started a small side venture on weekends. Nothing flashy, just something that made sense, something I could control, made mistakes, learned from them, made smarter decisions the next time. I didn't suddenly get rich, I got consistent, and consistency does something to your confidence that motivation never will. Slowly my posture changed, the way I spoke changed. I stopped over-explaining myself, stopped apologizing for taking up space. I learned to say no without guilt, learned that boundaries weren't walls, they were filters. And while all this was happening, my life didn't look impressive from the outside yet. My apartment was still modest, my car still old, my wardrobe simple, but internally, something solid was forming. I dated here and there, casual dinners, conversations that didn't go anywhere, and that was fine. I wasn't cold, I just wasn't empty enough to attach to the first person who showed interest anymore. I learned what it felt like to enjoy my own company, to sit with myself without reaching for a distraction. And the strange thing was, I never once checked her social media, never drove past places she might be, but I knew she was watching because mutual friends would slip things into conversation, because my name would come up, because views on my stories increased at weird times and I didn't acknowledge it, not out of spite, but because I genuinely didn't need to. My life was no longer a performance meant for her approval. Months turned into years. Promotions stacked slowly. The side venture became stable, then profitable. My finances got cleaner, my decisions sharper. And one day I caught my reflection in a mirror at work and realized I didn't recognize the guy staring back at me. Not because he looked richer or cooler, but because he looked calm, grounded, like someone who knew he'd be okay no matter who stayed or left. I wasn't happy yet. Not fully, but I wasn't drowning either. I was standing on solid ground for the first time in a long time, respected at work, trusted by people who mattered, and dangerous in the quietest way. The kind of man who doesn't need to announce his growth because it speaks for itself. And if this chapter of my life had a lesson, it's that rebuilding doesn't feel heroic while you're doing it. It feels boring and lonely and thankless. But when you look back, you realize you were becoming someone stronger while no one was paying attention, including the person who once thought you weren't enough. By the time she came back into my life, I wasn't waiting for her anymore. And that's the part that still feels surreal when I think about it. Because for a long time, I genuinely believed that if I ever saw her again, I'd either fall apart or feel nothing at all. But reality landed somewhere far more complicated. Years had passed by then, not in a dramatic blink, but in steady, ordinary days that stacked into something solid. My life had quietly filled itself in. My career was stable and paid well enough that money no longer lived rent-free in my head. My side work had grown into something legitimate. People at work respected my opinion. Friends trusted me. And most importantly, I trusted in myself. I wasn't chasing anything or anyone. I had routines I liked, a home that felt peaceful, and a sense of emotional balance that younger me would have laughed at. So when her name popped up on my phone one afternoon, I didn't feel that old jolt of panic, just a pause, a long breath, and a strange curiosity. Her message was casual on the surface, something about being in town, asking how I'd been, and for a moment, I considered not replying at all. Not out of anger, but because my life no longer revolved around unfinished conversations. But I answered anyway, short and polite. And that's how it started, not with fireworks, but with a crack in a door I thought had been permanently closed. We ended up running into each other a week later at a coffee place downtown. Either coincidence or fate, depending on how much credit you give the universe. And when I saw her walk in, I almost didn't recognize her. Not because she looked worse, but because she looked softer, less certain. The sharp confidence she once carried, like armor, was dulled around the edges. She smiled when she saw me, a smile that lingered just a second too long, and for the first time I noticed hesitation in her. The conversation was polite at first. Safe topics, work, life, surface level updates, and I listened more than I spoke, watching her closely, noticing how she studied me when she thought I wasn't paying attention, how her eyes traced details she'd never cared about before. The calm in my voice, the way I didn't rush to fill silences, and slowly the tone shifted. Nostalgia crept in like it always does. Little memories slipped into the conversation. Inside jokes, shared experiences, moments that once defined us, and she laughed more freely then, but there was something underneath it, a kind of ache she wasn't naming yet. Eventually, she started talking about her life after me. Not in a bragging way like before, but almost like a confession. The relationship she left me for wasn't what she imagined. The man wasn't cruel, just distant, busy, emotionally unavailable in ways she didn't anticipate. The lifestyle looked good from the outside, but felt empty when she was alone in it. She talked about dinners that felt transactional, trips that felt performative, and I listened without interrupting, without gloating, without satisfaction, because the truth was I didn't feel victorious hearing this. I felt clarity. She started complimenting me then. Not just my success, but my demeanor, how grounded I seemed, how different I felt, and I realized in real time that she was seeing me for the first time without the lens of impatience, without comparing me to some imaginary finish line. She asked questions she'd never asked before, about my goals, my thoughts, my perspective, and part of me felt validated in a way I hadn't expected, while another part stayed cautious, observing. And when she finally said the thing she'd been circling around all evening, admitting she'd made a mistake, admitting she thought about me more than she wanted to admit, I felt that old pull stir inside me. Not love exactly, but memory, familiarity, the ghost of a version of us that once felt safe. And that's when it hit me. Not all at once, but clearly enough to steady me. She didn't miss the man I was when she left. She missed the man I became without her. The stability, the confidence, the self-respect she couldn't wait for back then. And that realization didn't make me angry. It made me sad in a very specific way. Sad that timing and patience mattered more than feelings. Sad that growth only becomes attractive once it's complete. We talked for hours that night, honestly and openly, and when we finally stood up to leave, she looked at me like she was hoping I'd say something more, invite her back into my life in some meaningful way. And for a moment I stood there conflicted, aware of how far I'd come and how easily old doors can tempt you to walk backward. But I didn't promise anything. I didn't reject her either. I just told her it was good to see her and meant it. Walking away with a calm I didn't know I was capable of, because while old feelings had stirred, they no longer controlled me. And for the first time since she left, I understood that power doesn't come from being wanted again. It comes from knowing you'll be okay no matter what choice you make next. When she finally asked for another chance, it wasn't dramatic or sudden. It came the way everything else between us had started to come in this phase of our lives. Quietly, carefully, as if she was afraid that one wrong word would make me disappear again. We were sitting across from each other at a small restaurant neither of us had been to before, neutral ground. And I could tell she'd been rehearsing because she kept starting sentences and stopping, her fingers tracing the edge of her glass, her eyes searching my face for permission. And when she said it out loud, when she admitted she wanted to try again, wanted us, I didn't feel the rush I once imagined I would. I didn't feel triumph or anger or even excitement. I felt still, like someone standing on solid ground watching a wave crash far away. She talked about regret, about how she hadn't understood what she had until it was gone, about how she'd grown too, how she was different now, and I believed her in a limited way. Not because she was lying, but because regret and growth don't always come from the same place. And as she spoke, I found myself drifting backward through time, remembering the man I was when she left, The version of me who begged silently for patience, who stayed up late worrying about bills and the future while still believing love could carry us through. I remembered the nights I stared at the ceiling wondering what more I could have done, how much smaller I made myself trying to fit into her idea of a better life. And I thought about what it took to survive that version of me. The loneliness, the doubt, the slow rebuilding that happened without applause or reassurance, the discipline it took to stop blaming myself for someone else's choice, the quiet pride of becoming someone I respected when no one was watching, and sitting there across from her, listening to her explain why she was ready now. I understood something with absolute clarity. She wasn't wrong for wanting more, but she was wrong for leaving when things were hard and returning when things were easy, and that difference mattered more than any apology she could offer. I didn't interrupt her or argue. I let her finish because she deserved to be heard. And when it was my turn to speak, I didn't raise my voice or try to sound wise. I just told the truth as calmly as I could. I told her that the man she was talking to didn't exist when she left, that he was built in the space she vacated through nights of self-doubt and years of effort she never saw. And that while I didn't hate her, I couldn't unlearn what her leaving taught me about loyalty, about timing, about how love isn't just about choosing someone when it's convenient, but choosing them when it costs you something. I explained that going back wouldn't feel like love to me. It would feel like erasing the hardest lessons of my life, and that I valued myself too much now to do that. She cried quietly then, not theatrically, just tears she didn't wipe away. And I felt compassion without obligation. Sadness without guilt, because I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. Finished trying to prove my worth. Finished wondering if I'd been enough. Finished hoping someone would choose me once I became easier to choose. And when we stood to leave, there was no dramatic goodbye, just a mutual understanding that some doors close, not because of hatred, but because reopening them would mean walking backwards. The days after that conversation were surprisingly peaceful. No urge to second guess myself. No late night spirals. Just a steady sense of alignment. My life moved forward the way it had been moving all along. Work, friendships, quiet mornings, small joys. And when I thought of her, it wasn't with bitterness or longing, just with acceptance, like remembering a city you once lived in and outgrew. And that's how this story ends. Not with revenge or reconciliation, but with self-respect, with choosing myself fully and permanently, understanding that the version of me she wanted no longer needed her, and that the greatest closure I could ever give myself was a life lived honestly, calmly, and without resentment. The end. All right, let me talk to you for a second. Not as a narrator, not as a character, but as Adam Cole sitting with you after hearing this entire story from start to finish. What hit me the hardest about this story isn't the breakup. It isn't even the comeback, it's the restraint. Most stories like this turn into revenge fantasies. The guy gets rich, gets jacked, humiliates the ex, rides off into the sunset. But that's not what happened here. And honestly, that's why this one feels real. This story understands something most people don't. Closure isn't loud. It doesn't clap back. It doesn't post receipts. Closure is quiet confidence. It's walking away without needing the other person to fully understand why. The main character didn't win because she came back. He won because by the time she did, her opinion no longer controlled him. I also respect how this story shows growth the hard way. No shortcuts, no overnight success, just discipline, loneliness, boring consistency, and emotional maturity. That's the part people skip, but that's the part that actually changes you. And when she returned, softer, regretful, unsure, it wasn't satisfying in a cruel way. It was satisfying in a human way. Because he didn't punish her, he didn't beg either. He simply chose himself. That's the real message here. If someone leaves when you're becoming, they don't get access to you once you've arrived. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever been left behind, underestimated, or had to rebuild quietly, then you already know why stories like this matter. If you enjoyed this, make sure you like, subscribe, and support the channel so more stories like this get told. Your support keeps these voices alive. This is Adam Cole, and I'll see you in the next one.